Dirty facts about history that school probably didn't teach you, part 13. In ancient Egypt, there was a parasite in Egyptian rivers that would cause horrifying pee-pee bleeding, and this was considered a rite of passage for boys entering into manhood. Catherine the Great had a room filled with erotic furniture that she commissioned personally. We're talking BJs carved into chairs, an end table with giant peepees holding up a marble countertop, and other unspeakable things that I cannot say on TikTok. Needless to say, homegirl had taste. 12-year-old Pocahontas used to entertain white colonists with nude cartwheels. In 1694, Admiral Edward Russell threw an 8-day-long bender with the world's largest cocktail and over 6,000 guests. He poured hundreds of gallons of liquor into an enormous fountain and hired men to paddle around in boats, scoop it up, and serve it to the guests. And 8 days later, the fountain was completely dry.
Dirty history facts that school refuses to teach you. Benjamin Franklin had a MILF fetish. Benjamin Franklin wrote a letter to a younger boy telling him that older women were better because they're more experienced, and while the face wrinkles, the other parts do not. Cornflakes were invented to stop masturbation. Mr. Kellogg's believed masturbation was evil and bad for your health, and it was believed that plain food stopped that urge, so that is why he invented cornflakes. Frankenstein's author, Mary Shelley, lost her virginity on her mother's grave. Ancient Romans used to use stale urine as mouthwash, and it became so in demand that any Romans that traded it had to pay a separate tax. Stalin would have photos retouched to remove people he did not like from the picture. And this was mainly done to remove prominent people from historical events. Dirty history facts that school refuses to teach you. The first thing the father of microbiology put under a microscope was his own semen. The concept of single-celled organisms hadn't been discovered yet, so he expected to see tiny little humans in there. Mozart, the famous composer, had a song that translates to "lick me in the ass." The mayor of New Jersey created a spanking squad for young criminals. He had a spanking machine installed in City Hall, and he would use this instead of sending them to reformatory school. And some parents even voluntarily brought their children to him to use this machine. Benjamin Franklin used to stand naked in front of open windows and doors or even outside. He believed in something called air baths, where he just wanted to get as much airflow as possible, and he believed it would help him not get sick. Thomas Jefferson ended up having 6 children with his wife's female slave, Sally.
Here are some dirty history facts I can guarantee you were never taught, part 2. And if you ever told your history teacher any of these, they definitely go, what the fuck? According to private investigator Fred Stash, JFK was apparently a one-pump wonder, if you know what I mean. Ladies, for this one, I'm so sorry. For birth control, the Egyptian used a mix of ingredients, specifically 2, which included crocodile poop mixed with honey, and they would put it, yeah. Next, large eggplants, if you know what I mean, on the males of ancient Greece, were actually a sign of stupidity. Hence why all the statues have small ones, as it's actually a sign of being an intellect. Fuck! Stories go that King Tut was actually excited when he was mummified. That is definitely what I call a 2,000-year-old happy sleep. And finally, the whoopee cushion, revolutionary in today's society. But it actually dates back to the 14-year-old Roman Empire Elagabalus, when his whole legacy became inventing the whoopee cushion and pranking his dinner guests. Legend. These are some dirty history facts that I guarantee you were never taught. And if you ever told your history teacher any of these, they definitely go, excuse me, what the fuck? The first toy was invented by Cleopatra. However, to actually make it work, she put angry bees inside of it. You know, so they would go... I can't lie, don't think that would pass Dragon's Den. Next up, the ancient Romans used stale urine as mouthwash. Cool, but why? We actually know that Benjamin Franklin had a MILF fetish. A letter that he wrote back in the day was actually found and confirmed this. However, the detail he went into within this letter, we're not gonna go there. There is a sign in Pompeii next to the fountain that translates to "please don't shit in the fountain." All I can think is how many times did that have to happen for a sign to become necessary? And finally, cornflakes were invented to stop what rhymes with fastitation. It was believed that doing this to yourself was a big no-no. They thought stale foods helped fight this urge. Thus, cornflakes. Anywho.
Here are some wild facts that I bet you didn't learn in history class. The first known photograph of a person was taken in 1838. It only happened because a man and his shoe shiner were the only people still enough on a busy street to show up in the 10-minute exposure. In 1937, 2 women wore shorts out in public for the first time. They drew a massive amount of male attention and even caused a car accident. The Great Pyramid of Giza was the tallest building in the world for nearly 4,000 years until the Lincoln Cathedral was built in 1311. When trains were first introduced in the US, women were afraid to ride in them. This is because many people believe that women's bodies were not designed to go 50 miles an hour, and that their uteruses would fly out of their bodies if they were accelerated to that speed.
Weird history facts they don't teach in school, Part 1. A Chinese emperor escaped an assassin by running around a pillar. After 2 hours the assassin got bored and he went home. And he wasn't even charged for his crimes. Ancient Romans would put sandals on the hands of sleeping people and then tickle their face so they would slap themselves. Claudius Drusus died from asphyxiation when he tossed a pear and caught it in his mouth. The pear tree was actually put on trial. It was found guilty of murder and destroyed. Disturbing history facts they don't teach in school, Part 2. At one point, Christopher Columbus fed a child slave alive to dogs. His guys also killed infants for dog food. They hunted natives for sport, tested the sharpness of blades on people, and did many other horrible things. The Bath School disaster in Michigan. In 1927, a man named Andrew Kehoe lost a seat for a treasury position, so he decided to take his revenge by blowing up the school. He killed quite a few kids and some staff. Before blowing up the school, he murdered his whole family, and after all that he blew up his truck with himself in it. Disturbing history facts that they don't teach in school. Human zoos were active until 1958. They had people from various regions in cages. The My Lai massacre in Vietnam. The US Marines marched into a village and killed over 600 people. Even the babies were shot. The pirates were the terrorists of their time. Killing, burning, execution games, slavery, and even cannibalism, so they had nothing to do with the pirates in the movies.
Yo, what's up? Here are some disturbing history facts that your teacher didn't teach you, but I'm about to. Part 1. It was said that back during the times of slavery, black babies were used as alligator bait, and it was even said that of course they were used, but the question is, how often were the babies fed to the alligators? Back during the early 19th century, before medical professionals could tell the difference between paralysis or a coma and death, they actually put a safety net over the dead person's body to make sure that if the body was or the person was still alive, they couldn't escape from the coffin. In 1815, during the Battle of Waterloo, they actually took the teeth out of dead soldiers' mouths and used them for dentures on living soldiers. Yeah, that's disgusting. Isaac Newton had his walls painted red for the simple fact that he had a strange addiction to blood. But this wasn't just any type of blood, but the menstrual blood of whores, as he claimed. Yo, what's up? Here's some disturbing history facts that your teacher didn't teach you, but I'm about to. Part 2. Did you know that in 1929, 2 researchers turned a live cat into a telephone? And I know what you're thinking, there's literally no way. But sure enough, 2 scientists from Princeton wanted to test how the auditory nerve perceives sound, so they cut out a piece of the cat's brain and went to work. So while the cat was heavily sedated but still very much alive, they attached one side of the wire to the auditory nerve of the cat and the other to a receiver, and they just began talking back and forth with a normal conversation. A little strange if you ask me. Back in the early 1900s, there was a Russian mystic named Rasputin, and he survived not 1, not 2, but 3 assassination attempts on him. The first attempt, someone tried to poison him. The second attempt, someone shot him. And the third attempt, someone stabbed him. And yet he was still kicking after all of this. And eventually he was wrapped in a blanket and thrown in a river, and that's how he died. But not before assassins cut off his private parts and pickled them in a jar.
Disturbing historical facts. An entire factory crew happily worked with radium in the 20s, and most of them died horrifically of radiation poisoning not very long after. In the 18th century, a woman actually convinced doctors that she was giving birth to rabbits. A 7th century woman gave birth after she had already died, and her case isn't unique. Being buried alive was way more common than you might have thought in the 18th century. A single tiger killed an estimated 436 people in Nepal at the turn of the 20th century. In the 1800s, a lot of dentures were actually made using the teeth of dead soldiers. In 1922, an entire family was murdered on their farm under very mysterious circumstances. The killer was never found. In Victorian England, people used to take pictures of their dead relatives in lifelike positions to keep as mementos. Human remains were a common ingredient in medicine until the 20th century. A novel about a seemingly unsinkable ship that was hit by an iceberg was published in 1898, 14 years before the Titanic sunk.
Insane history facts that school just refused to teach you. During times of war, humans have been known to take their weapons and stick them in shit. That way, if they stab anybody with it, it inflicts that extra poison damage. The famous poet Edgar Allan Poe was 27 years old when he dove deep into alcoholism, lost his job, and decided that the next course of action for his life would be to marry Virginia Eliza Clem, his 13-year-old cousin. She died about 10 years later from tuberculosis. Toulouse-Lautrec is a very famous painter from the late 1800s who apparently had a giant penis. But because he was only about 5 feet tall, the prostitutes that he hung around called him Teapot because he's short and stout.